The late afternoon sun was soft, casting a warm glow over the city streets. People moved in a steady flow, some hurrying to finish errands, others strolling without a care. The sounds of traffic, distant laughter, and car horns filled the air. Amid this ordinary bustle, a man walked alone, calm and composed. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and kept his head up, moving with a quiet confidence. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't need to be. There was something about him that made it clear he was comfortable in his own skin, someone who had learned how to navigate life without seeking attention. As he walked, he noticed the usual city sights: a street performer strumming a guitar on the corner, a hot dog stand sending up small clouds of steam, and people chatting by shop windows. But ahead, on the opposite sidewalk, a small group of men caught his attention. They were young, late teens to early 20s, wearing hoodies and jeans, leaning against a wall in a way that seemed deliberately intimidating. Their laughter carried across the street, loud and brash. The man slowed his pace slightly, observing them without any sign of fear. He had learned long ago that situations like this required awareness and patience, not reaction. The group of men noticed him almost immediately. One of them nudged the other, pointing subtly in his direction. He could feel their eyes on him, sizing him up, and he kept his expression neutral. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He simply walked, letting them see him clearly, giving nothing away. But that simple act seemed to irritate them. They were used to people reacting in one of two ways: fear or arrogance. He was neither. As he got closer, one of the men stepped forward, breaking from the group. He had a cocky grin on his face, the kind of grin that says, "I'm in charge here." "Hey, look at you," the man said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Walking around like you own the place. You think you're special or something?" The man kept walking, his pace steady. He didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. Words could be weapons, and he wanted to see how the group would wield theirs. The cocky man laughed, a sharp, hollow sound, and nudged one of his friends. "He's ignoring us. That's even funnier." The group laughed a little too loudly, trying to draw attention to themselves. They thought that by making noise and mocking him, they could shake his confidence, make him react. But he didn't flinch. He could feel their energy, the tension growing with every step he took closer to them, but he stayed calm. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" one of the other men shouted. "Don't you have somewhere to run off to, little man?" The words were meant to belittle, to provoke, but the man didn't let them stick. He maintained his gaze straight ahead, but inside he was aware of every movement they made. He noticed how one of them fidgeted with a chain on his neck, how another tapped his foot impatiently, how the third kept scanning the street, probably looking for a witness or backup. He remembered a time when he might have reacted differently, when words like that could sting. But he had grown wiser. Life had taught him that people like this often acted from weakness, from fear or boredom. Their laughter was a shield, their bravado a mask. If he let their actions control his emotions, he would be giving them power. He refused to do that. The man continued walking, and the gang's laughter grew louder. They began calling out names, nicknames, and insults. Some were crude, some were silly, but all aimed to get a reaction. He could see a few people on the sidewalks around him starting to notice, slowing their own pace, trying to gauge what might happen next. No one intervened, but he didn't expect them to. Most people were used to avoiding conflict, keeping their heads down and moving on. Suddenly, the man heard one of them step closer, intentionally brushing against his arm as he passed. It was subtle but deliberate. The man didn't react physically. He simply shifted his weight slightly, keeping his stride smooth. He could feel the heat of anger from the gang members, but he stayed composed. This wasn't about who was stronger physically. It was about control, about who could think clearly when tension rose. "Man, you think you're too good to talk to us," the first man said, raising his voice. "You walking around like you own the streets, huh?" He laughed, and the others joined in, forming a circle around him now. He could feel their presence on both sides, but he didn't panic. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air enter his lungs, letting it calm him. Inside, he was calculating. He assessed each person quickly, their body language, the space between them, their likely reactions. He wasn't planning to fight yet. He was planning to survive and perhaps teach them a lesson about underestimating someone. He knew that people like this often relied on intimidation to get what they wanted. If he showed fear, they would escalate. If he showed anger, they would feed on it. But if he showed control, If he acted with purpose, he could change the dynamic. One of the gang members stepped directly in front of him, trying to block his path. "Ain't you gonna say something, huh?" he demanded. The man stopped, paused for a moment, and looked at him carefully. Not with hostility, not with fear, but with quiet strength. He measured his words before speaking. "I'm just walking home," he said calmly. "No trouble here." The gang laughed again, louder this time, as if mocking his politeness. "Walking home? That's it? You don't even fight back?" One shouted. They were expecting him to snap, to yell, or to act defensively, but he didn't. His silence was like a mirror to their foolishness, reflecting how empty their bravado really was. He noticed a small dog tied outside a nearby shop, barking nervously at the commotion. The man briefly crouched, gave the dog a small reassuring gesture, and stood up. That small act, unnoticed by the gang, was a reminder to himself. He could stay humane and calm even in tense situations. That was part of his strength. The gang members, frustrated that he wasn't responding the way they wanted, began pushing slightly, testing boundaries. The man didn't flinch. He shifted his stance subtly, keeping his balance, letting them feel his presence without escalating. One of them stepped too close, and he gently but firmly nudged the man back, not with aggression but with precision. It was a small action, barely noticeable, but it caught the aggressor off guard. "Whoa, hey! Watch it, man," the gang member said, his tone suddenly a little unsure. The others paused too, sensing that their plan wasn't unfolding the way they expected. They had assumed he would either run, shout, or freeze. He did none of these things. He simply held his ground. Bystanders who had been watching from across the street started to notice the shift in energy. There was no shouting, no chaos yet, but the tension was palpable. People instinctively gave the space some room, unsure if something more serious was about to happen. But the man remained calm, keeping his movements minimal, letting his presence speak for itself. The gang, growing impatient, tried to laugh it off again, but the laughter sounded forced now. They were unsure how to proceed. Each time one of them tried to intimidate him, he responded in ways that didn't escalate the conflict but subtly disrupted their control. It was clear to anyone paying attention that he was not an easy target. He continued walking slowly, keeping a clear path ahead. The gang flanked him briefly, but he didn't panic. He noticed a narrow alley to his left, a possible escape route if needed, but he didn't plan to use it yet. He wanted to see how far they would go, and he wanted to make them feel the natural consequences of underestimating someone who refused to be pushed around. As he moved past them, he glanced over his shoulder just enough to keep track of their positions. One of the younger members made a slight motion as if to block him again, but stopped. There was hesitation now, a crack in their confident facade. They were realizing slowly that he wasn't just another person walking by. He was aware, capable, and not intimidated. The man's mind raced quietly, not with fear, not with anger, but with strategy. He considered the safest way to get past this group, to avoid unnecessary conflict while still asserting himself. He knew he didn't need to prove anything through violence. His composure and presence were proof enough. Finally, as he reached a slightly wider part of the street, he slowed to a normal pace, signaling that he was not rushing, not fleeing, not panicking. The gang, realizing they couldn't easily control him, started to lose their confidence. Their laughter diminished, replaced by quiet murmurs of frustration. The man didn't look back. He kept walking, every step deliberate, showing that he was in charge of himself, that he controlled his own path. By the time he passed the gang completely, a few bystanders nodded subtly in his direction, a small recognition of the calm strength he had shown. He continued down the street, blending back into the normal flow of the city, carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew that sometimes the most powerful action is simply not reacting. The man had just turned the corner when he felt it, a sudden shift in the air, the same kind of tension that made people instinctively step back. He knew the group hadn't forgotten him. They hadn't laughed as they used to. They were plotting now. He sensed it in their energy, in the way they moved with more purpose than before. They had seen that he didn't flinch, and that stung their pride. Now they wanted to prove themselves, to reclaim the sense of control they had lost. As he continued down the sidewalk, he could hear footsteps behind him, uneven, quick, deliberate. The gang had split into two, flanking him from both sides. One of them, the loud one with the cocky grin, shouted again. You think you can just walk past us like that? Think you're untouchable? The words weren't just loud. They carried challenge, a demand for him to react. He kept his pace steady. He didn't turn his head immediately. Instead, he allowed himself a careful glance, enough to acknowledge their presence. Their faces, at first confident, now showed hints of impatience and frustration. They were used to getting a reaction, and he hadn't given them one. This unnerved them. One of them stepped closer, intentionally brushing against the man's shoulder. It was a push masked as an accident. The man didn't jerk or stumble. He simply adjusted his stance, letting the movement roll off him without a reaction. In that small, controlled motion, he sent a clear message. He was aware, he was ready, but he would not be provoked without reason. The gang's frustration grew. One of them grabbed at his arm lightly, trying to stop him in his tracks. "Man, don't ignore us. Answer me." The man paused, looked at him calmly, and said in a steady voice, "I'm just trying to go home." Nothing more. There was no fear, no bitterness. Just a simple, calm statement of fact. That calmness seemed to unsettle them even more than aggression would have. Their laughter faded, replaced by murmurs and whispered comments among themselves. They had expected to intimidate him with noise and presence, but he had taken their power away, simply by refusing to play the part they wanted him to. Still, their persistence didn't end. One of them stepped directly in front, blocking his path, and leaned in as if to make him feel cornered. "You think you're better than us? Walking past like you're untouchable? Show some respect." His tone was harsh, but there was uncertainty beneath it. A crack in the facade of bravado. The man stayed still for a moment, measuring the distance, the space between himself and the aggressor. He noticed how uncoordinated their movements were, how little thought had gone into their plan. They relied on intimidation and volume rather than strategy. He also noticed how the city around them continued to hum with life, how people were now glancing in their direction, some stopping to watch from a safe distance. He took a slow breath and decided to respond, not with anger, but with presence. He stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, just enough to reclaim the space they had tried to invade. The movement was controlled, deliberate. The aggressor flinched slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make the others pause. "Look, I'm not here to fight anyone," he said calmly, keeping his voice even and measured. "I just want to go home. No need for trouble." His words were soft, but there was weight behind them, a quiet authority. They carried the sense of someone who didn't need to prove himself with fists or shouts. The gang seemed unsure how to respond. One of them muttered something under his breath. Another fidgeted with a chain around his neck, and the loud one tried to regain control by raising his voice again. "Man, you're too quiet." "We don't like quiet. Speak up." The man shook his head slightly, not in fear, but in subtle dismissal. He knew that reacting in anger or sarcasm would only give them fuel. By remaining calm, he kept control of the situation. He continued walking slowly, creating space as he moved. The gang followed, mirroring his steps, trying to intimidate him by staying close. As they walked, the man noticed small details that helped him understand the group's dynamics. One of the younger members kept looking around as if hoping someone else would intervene. Another seemed eager for a fight but hesitant to make the first move. The leader, the loud one, was growing impatient, his energy tense, his grin now tight and forced. The man's awareness extended beyond the gang. He noted a construction site up ahead with scaffolding and narrow pathways. He also saw a small group of pedestrians turning a corner ahead, some looking curious, others trying to avoid attention. These details mattered. He knew that situational awareness could prevent danger and provide options if things escalated. Suddenly, the loud one made a more aggressive move. He stepped directly into the man's path, trying to corner him against a low wall. "You think you can just walk around ignoring us? Come on, man. Stand up." The words were sharp, demanding, but the man didn't respond with anger. He stood tall, calm, letting his eyes meet the aggressors with quiet intensity. There was a moment of silence, a pause in the chaos. The gang members glanced at each other, sensing that their plan wasn't working. The man had taken their power away without throwing a single punch, without raising his voice. They had underestimated him, and now it was showing. The man noticed a loose piece of wood near the wall, something that could be used to block a path or defend himself if necessary. He subtly adjusted his footing, making sure he could move quickly if the situation escalated. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he was prepared. Preparation and calm thinking were his allies. One of the gang members, frustrated by the lack of reaction, made a half-hearted grab at his arm. The man shifted his weight smoothly, using the motion to redirect the contact without struggle. The aggressor stumbled slightly and caught himself, surprised by how easy it was for the man to avoid conflict while maintaining control. "Why are you so calm?" the loud one shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "Ain't you scared of us?" The man smiled faintly, not mockingly, but in a way that showed understanding. "Why should I be? I'm just walking home. You can make a lot of noise, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm moving forward." His words were simple, but they carried strength. They communicated that he was aware of the threat but not consumed by it. At this point, the gang's energy began to shift. Their initial confidence had faltered. They had expected someone who would either run, fight, or argue. They hadn't expected calmness, intelligence, or composure. Each step they took now seemed heavier, more uncertain. The man continued walking, keeping his pace steady. He used small, controlled gestures to create space, subtly guiding the flow of movement around him. He noticed a few bystanders stopping to watch, sensing the tension. Some whispered to each other, while others took a few cautious steps closer to see what might happen next. The loud one, desperate to regain control, raised his hands in a mocking gesture. "Man, what's with you? You think you're untouchable? Stand up and fight." He laughed, but the laugh was hollow. The others tried to join in, but the energy wasn't the same. The man's calmness had disrupted their rhythm, broken their expectation. He kept moving, approaching a street corner where the sunlight hit the buildings at a sharp angle. He could see potential escape routes, narrow alleys, and open spaces where he could maneuver if necessary. Every detail mattered. He knew that knowing the environment could prevent escalation and provide options if things went wrong. The gang followed, still trying to intimidate, still hoping he would react. But each step they took revealed their lack of planning. They relied on volume and presence, not strategy. They underestimated the man, assuming that silence and calmness meant weakness. They were wrong. At the corner, the man made a subtle but deliberate shift, creating distance between himself and the loud one. The movement was small but calculated. It showed control and readiness. The gang hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond. They were beginning to realize that they couldn't easily provoke him, that his calmness and awareness were a form of strength they hadn't anticipated. The man glanced briefly at the crowd of bystanders, noting their curiosity and caution. Some had phones in hand, ready to record, but none had intervened yet. He understood. In tense situations, people often hesitate, unsure of how to act. He didn't judge them. He focused on his path, keeping his mind sharp and aware. The loud one tried one last time, stepping forward aggressively. "Come on, man. Don't just stand there." The words were more forceful, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he simply adjusted his position, maintaining balance and calm. The subtle shift made the aggressor stumble slightly, his confidence shaken. By now, the gang members were visibly frustrated. Their laughter had disappeared entirely, replaced by tension and uncertainty. They had expected an easy target, someone who would react predictably. They had found neither fear nor anger, only calm, deliberate strength. The man continued down the street, his movements smooth and confident. Each step communicated awareness, readiness, and control. He was not seeking confrontation, but he was not afraid of it either. He understood that power often lay not in aggression but in composure, in the ability to navigate a tense situation without losing control. As he reached a busier intersection, the gang finally seemed to relent slightly, staying a few steps behind rather than crowding him. Their energy had shifted from confidence to caution. They were beginning to realize that underestimating someone could be dangerous, even without physical confrontation. The man crossed the street calmly, keeping his pace steady. The crowd of bystanders dispersed slightly, some nodding in subtle acknowledgement of his composure. He had navigated a tense, potentially dangerous encounter with intelligence, awareness, and quiet strength. For the first time, the gang seemed unsure of what to do next. Their plan to intimidate had failed. Their expectation of an easy reaction had been completely disrupted. They were left with frustration, confusion, and the realization that appearances could be deceiving. The man walked on, disappearing into the flow of the city streets. He didn't gloat, he didn't look back. He carried himself with quiet dignity, aware that he had successfully navigated a dangerous moment with composure and intelligence. The gang, meanwhile, lingered behind, left to reflect on their misjudgment and the unexpected strength of someone they had assumed was weak. The man had put some distance between himself and the group, but he knew the encounter wasn't over. There was a tension in the air, subtle but undeniable, the kind that told him the gang wasn't going to let things go so easily. He could feel their eyes on him, tracking his movements, and he could sense that their frustration had shifted into impatience. They had underestimated him, and now they wanted to regain control. As he walked, he noticed a small side street ahead that offered a shortcut toward his apartment. Normally he might have taken it, but something told him to stay on the main road. The gang had assumed he would flee at the first sign of danger, and he wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. He wanted to control the situation, not run from it. Staying on the main street meant that whatever happened next would unfold openly, and he felt confident in his ability to handle it. The gang had now fully regrouped, moving together in a semicircle to block his path. They didn't rush him yet. They wanted to gauge his reaction. He noticed the way one of them shifted nervously from foot to foot, while another tapped a cigarette against his hand, trying to appear casual. The leader, the loud one, had his hands balled into fists, clearly itching for a confrontation. The man's mind worked quickly, but calmly. He assessed the distance, the positioning of each member, the open spaces around them. He also noticed small details that could be useful: a trash can near the corner, a bench along the sidewalk, a streetlight pole that could serve as a barrier if needed. Everything was part of the environment, part of the plan he had already formed in his mind. Without a word, he slowed slightly, letting the gang feel that he was aware of their intentions. They mistook the pause for hesitation, a crack in his calm exterior, and one of them stepped forward aggressively. "Come on, say something. You can't just ignore us." He looked at the young man, not with anger, not with fear, but with quiet intensity. "I'm not ignoring you. I'm just trying to get home safely," he said in a steady voice. His calmness contrasted sharply with their aggression, and it created an almost tangible tension. The words weren't a challenge, but they carried authority. The leader, frustrated by the lack of fear or aggression, lunged forward suddenly, hoping to provoke him. The man was ready. He sidestepped smoothly, using the aggressor's momentum against him, and shifted slightly to block any further approach. The move was fluid, almost instinctive, and it surprised the gang. The loud one stumbled slightly, not expecting such skill or awareness. For a moment there was a pause. The sound of the city seemed to fade, replaced by the collective tension of the group. Bystanders who had noticed earlier now stopped again, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Some instinctively took a step back, creating space. Others whispered to each other, unsure if they should intervene or stay out of it. The man didn't panic. He had faced tense situations before and knew that panic only made things worse. Instead, he maintained his stance, his feet planted firmly on the ground, his hands relaxed but ready. His eyes scanned the group, reading their intentions, noticing which ones were bluffing and which ones were serious. One of the younger members, clearly the most impulsive, took a step closer and tried to shove him. The man didn't resist forcefully. Instead, he shifted his weight, using the shove to guide the young man slightly to the side without causing harm. The move was precise and calm, demonstrating control rather than aggression. The other gang members were visibly shaken. Their plan to intimidate him with physical presence had failed. The man had neutralized their actions without escalating, and it left them uncertain. They began whispering to each other, their bravado fading under the weight of his composure. The leader, angry and humiliated, raised his voice. "Enough of this. Show us what you're made of." His tone was meant to provoke, but it lacked conviction. The man responded calmly, still measured. "I've shown you I'm not going to fight unless I have to. You can still walk away without causing trouble." The calmness in his voice was disarming. The gang members looked at one another, realizing that they had misjudged him. Their confidence had been based on assumptions, that he would react predictably, that he would fear them, that he would give them power over him. He had taken that power away simply by remaining aware and composed. But one member, the youngest and most reckless, wasn't willing to back down. He charged forward, trying to force the confrontation. The man reacted instantly, stepping to the side and using the momentum to gently push him past. It wasn't violent, but it was effective. The young man stumbled slightly, surprised by the skill and control displayed. The other members hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Their leader, enraged, tried to step in, but the man's presence alone gave them pause. There was a quiet authority in the way he stood, a subtle command that demanded attention without words. The man continued walking slowly, creating space and guiding the gang subtly. He wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't passive either. Every movement was calculated to maintain control and prevent escalation. He was aware that one wrong move could turn a tense encounter into something dangerous. The gang members tried to follow, but their coordination was poor. They whispered to one another, frustrated and confused. They had expected fear, aggression, or resistance, but they got something entirely different: control and awareness. The man's calmness had shifted the balance, leaving them uncertain and hesitant. He noticed a small alleyway to his right, leading toward a quieter street. It could serve as an escape if needed, but he didn't plan to use it yet. He wanted to show that he wasn't afraid, that he could navigate the situation without running. By staying on the main street, he maintained control and ensured that the outcome depended on his actions, not theirs. As he moved, he noticed a delivery truck parked nearby. Its size created a natural barrier between him and the gang. He adjusted his path slightly, using the environment to maintain space without appearing defensive. The gang members, realizing that their attempts to close in were being subtly thwarted, grew more frustrated. The leader shouted again, trying to regain control. "Man, stop playing games. We're not done." But the man didn't flinch. He kept walking, every step calm and deliberate. His eyes remained focused, his awareness sharp. He was ready for any escalation, but he refused to give in to provocation. Suddenly, one of the gang members reached into his pocket, pulling out a small object. The man's instincts immediately heightened, but he didn't panic. He assessed the situation quickly, noting the distance, the angle, and the possible outcomes. In a controlled motion, he shifted slightly, positioning himself to avoid any sudden moves without creating alarm. The youngest member, sensing the tension, froze. The leader, realizing the move had been noticed, hesitated. The man's calm awareness had disrupted their coordination again. They were no longer acting as a group. They were reacting to him individually, uncertain of what to do next. The man continued forward, keeping his pace steady. He wasn't looking for confrontation, but he was ready to act if necessary. His body language communicated confidence, control, and awareness. The gang, once loud and confident, now moved cautiously, unsure how to regain the advantage. At the next corner, the man paused briefly, taking a deep breath. He looked around, noting the pedestrians, the street vendors, and the cars passing by. He wasn't alone, but he wasn't helpless. He understood that awareness and composure were his strongest tools. The gang members, meanwhile, whispered to each other, realizing that their attempts to intimidate had failed repeatedly. The leader stepped forward again, trying to assert authority, but his movements were hesitant, lacking the confidence he had shown earlier. The man's calmness had eroded their aggression, leaving them vulnerable in ways they hadn't anticipated. In a smooth motion, the man continued walking, guiding the gang subtly with his presence. He wasn't trying to scare them. He was simply asserting his own space and awareness. Each movement demonstrated control, showing that he wasn't an easy target. Bystanders who had been watching began to notice the shift. Some whispered to each other, impressed by the calmness and skill on display. Others kept a safe distance, unsure if the encounter would escalate further. The man didn't acknowledge them. He remained focused on his path and the group ahead. The youngest member, frustrated and humiliated, made a sudden move, trying to push past him. The man reacted instantly, using a gentle but precise motion to redirect him. The young man stumbled, surprised by the effectiveness of the maneuver. The leader shouted again, but his voice lacked conviction now. The gang's confidence continued to waver. Their initial plan had been to intimidate him with noise and presence. Instead, they were facing someone calm, aware, and in control. Each failed attempt to provoke him chipped away at their arrogance. The man continued down the street, every step deliberate, every movement calculated. He maintained control without aggression, awareness without fear. The gang followed cautiously, their energy now tense and uncertain. They had underestimated him, and the realization was sinking in slowly, painfully. By the time he reached the intersection near his apartment, the gang's bravado had diminished significantly. Their initial laughter was gone, replaced by whispered frustration and uncertainty. They had learned too late that appearances could be deceiving and that underestimating someone could have consequences. The man paused briefly, taking a final look at the group. He didn't need to say anything. His calm, controlled demeanor had communicated everything. The gang members, frustrated and shaken, remained behind, left to process their failure. He continued toward his apartment, walking with quiet dignity. He had navigated a dangerous encounter with composure, awareness, and strategy. He had turned their aggression into an opportunity to demonstrate control without resorting to violence. The city around him carried on, unaware of the quiet strength that had just passed through its streets. But those who had watched would remember the encounter for a long time. The man had walked a few more blocks, his step steady, his mind alert yet calm. The tension from the earlier encounter lingered slightly, but he didn't allow it to affect him. He knew the gang was frustrated and confused, unsure of what to do next. He could almost feel their hesitation even from a distance, the way their energy shifted as they realized that the easy target they had expected was not so easy after all. He glanced around at the street, taking note of the everyday life continuing around him. A street vendor was packing up his cart, a group of kids chased each other down the sidewalk, and a couple of people walked their dogs. Life went on, indifferent to the small storm that had passed moments ago. Yet the man was aware that the story wasn't finished. The gang had one more instinct: to reclaim pride, to assert control, to feel dominant again. Sure enough, as he passed a narrow alley, he heard the faint sound of hurried footsteps behind him. They hadn't given up. The gang had split again, two members stepping ahead, blocking his path from behind. The loud one, frustrated and increasingly reckless, shouted, "Man, you're not getting away this time." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't panic. He had prepared himself for moments like this, though he hoped it wouldn't escalate further. He noticed the positioning of the gang, the gaps in their formation, and the slight nervousness in their movements. It was subtle but clear to him. He could see that their confidence was fractured. The arrogance that had fueled their initial aggression was fading, replaced with doubt. One of the younger members tried to step in front of him aggressively, but the man anticipated the move. He sidestepped smoothly, guiding the boy past him with a controlled motion that was gentle but effective. The boy stumbled slightly, more out of surprise than force, and the gang's leader shouted in frustration, "Stop playing games. Show some backbone." The man didn't answer immediately. He allowed the moment to stretch, creating space and asserting his calm authority without aggression. His presence alone began to influence the gang's behavior. They hesitated, unsure whether to push forward, retreat, or scatter. He noticed a few bystanders who had been observing from a safe distance. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and admiration. Some whispered quietly to one another, noting the composure of the man and the frustration of the gang. He didn't look at them. He didn't need to. The city itself seemed to pause around the tense moment, and he moved deliberately, ensuring that each step maintained control and prevented escalation. The loud one, growing increasingly desperate, tried a different tactic. He stepped directly into the man's path and raised his fists in a threatening manner. "You think you're too smart for us? Too calm? Let's see what you got." His voice was loud, but there was an unmistakable tremor of uncertainty beneath it. The man responded with a steady, measured tone. "I'm not here to fight anyone." "You can still walk away." He moved slightly to the side, creating space and showing that he was aware and in control. It wasn't aggression that made him formidable. It was composure, awareness, and the subtle mastery of space. The gang members exchanged glances, their earlier bravado now replaced by doubt. They had expected easy intimidation and immediate reactions. What they found was a person who didn't react in predictable ways, whose calmness disrupted their control. They whispered among themselves, frustrated and confused, unsure how to proceed. At that moment, the man noticed a potential opening, a narrow street leading toward a busier area. It could provide safety if things escalated, but more importantly, it gave him a strategic advantage. He adjusted his pace, guiding the group subtly without them noticing. Each small step was calculated, allowing him to maintain authority over the situation. The leader, sensing his plan slipping away, made a sudden move to block him. The man anticipated it, shifting his weight and using a gentle push to redirect him. The leader stumbled slightly, visibly shocked by the ease with which his motion was neutralized. His confidence wavered, and the other members froze for a moment, unsure whether to advance or retreat. The man continued moving forward, calm and deliberate. He understood the psychology of the moment. Aggression from him would escalate the conflict. Passive behavior might embolden them. His solution was control through composure, a steady, unwavering presence that communicated strength without violence. As they followed him cautiously, the gang tried to regroup, whispering to one another. Their frustration was evident. They had underestimated him, and each failed attempt to intimidate him had chipped away at their confidence. The man noticed this and adjusted his movement slightly, maintaining enough distance to prevent any sudden escalation while subtly asserting his presence. A streetlight flickered above, casting long shadows that danced along the sidewalk. The man's eyes flicked to each shadow, noticing potential hazards and advantages. Awareness of his environment was part of his control. The gang, by contrast, was becoming reactive, their movements uncoordinated and tense. One of the members, clearly the most impulsive, tried to lunge forward again. The man reacted instantly, using a small sidestep and guiding the young man past him without harm. The motion was smooth, almost imperceptible, but effective. The boy's stumble caused the group to pause once more, their plan unraveling further. The leader shouted, attempting to regain authority. "Stop messing around. Don't think you're getting away." His voice was sharp, but it lacked the confidence it had earlier. The man responded calmly, not with words, but with presence. He continued walking, his steps steady, his posture straight, his movements deliberate. Every subtle action communicated awareness and strength. The gang members were growing more hesitant with each step. Their earlier energy and laughter had disappeared entirely. Now they whispered, exchanged nervous glances, and shifted their positions. The man could feel their uncertainty as he guided the interaction with quiet authority. He passed a small cafe where a few people had stepped outside to observe. They whispered, pointing subtly, some impressed by his calmness and composure. The man didn't acknowledge them. He knew that focus was critical. Any distraction could give the gang an opportunity to regain control. He maintained awareness of every detail, the distance of the group, the environment around him, and the subtle changes in the gang's behavior. One of the younger members, frustrated and desperate, made another move. He stepped forward aggressively, trying to provoke a reaction. The man shifted slightly, guiding him off balance without harm, maintaining control. The boy's stumble elicited a frustrated shout from the leader, but his tone was uneven, reflecting the loss of confidence. The man continued down the street, calm and purposeful. He noticed the gang was no longer moving with coordination. Each member acted individually, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Their strategy had collapsed. They had relied on intimidation, but he had dismantled it through composure and awareness. At the next corner, the man paused briefly, assessing the situation. He had led the gang to a slightly more open space where he could move freely if necessary. They had followed him cautiously, but their frustration and uncertainty were now apparent. The balance had shifted completely. The leader, realizing his control was slipping, attempted one last aggressive move. He stepped into the man's path, fists raised, shouting threats. But the man was ready. He maintained a calm stance, shifting slightly to the side, and used a controlled motion to guide the aggressor past him once again. The leader stumbled, caught off guard by the man's skill and composure. The gang members exchanged frustrated glances. Their plan had failed completely. They had underestimated him, and their attempts to assert dominance had been ineffective. The man had turned the situation around without using aggression, demonstrating a quiet strength that left them unsure of how to proceed. By now, the bystanders who had been watching were clearly impressed. Some whispered comments of admiration, while others simply observed in silence. The man remained focused, aware of their presence but not distracted by it. His priority was controlling the interaction with the gang, not seeking recognition. The gang began to move backward slightly, realizing that further aggression could backfire. Their energy was fractured, their confidence gone. They whispered among themselves, clearly discussing what to do next. The man continued walking calmly, asserting control through presence and awareness. As he approached a busier street, the gang hesitated. The shift in environment combined with their loss of confidence caused them to pause. The man continued forward, maintaining a calm, deliberate pace. His composure had turned the encounter in his favor without violence. Finally, the gang seemed to retreat slightly, staying behind rather than continuing to block his path. Their frustration was evident, but they had learned an important lesson. Underestimating someone based on appearance or demeanor could lead to unexpected consequences. The man crossed the street safely, his movements steady and controlled. The city carried on around him, unaware of the subtle battle that had just unfolded. He had navigated a potentially dangerous encounter with awareness, composure, and quiet strength. The gang, meanwhile, was left to reflect on their mistakes and the unexpected resilience of the man they had underestimated. By the time he reached the relative safety of a familiar street, he paused briefly, taking a deep breath. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. He hadn't needed to fight. He hadn't needed to shout or show anger. His strength had come from calmness, awareness, and the ability to control his own reactions in a tense situation. The gang, still a block behind, lingered for a moment, unsure how to respond. Their plan to intimidate had failed completely. They had learned too late that appearances could be deceiving and that a calm, aware individual could turn their aggression against them without lifting a hand. The man continued down the street, blending into the normal flow of the city. He walked with quiet dignity, carrying himself with confidence and composure. The lesson of the encounter was clear. Strength isn't always measured by aggression. Sometimes it is measured by calm, awareness, and the ability to control a situation without escalating it. The man finally reached the familiar street leading to his apartment, a sense of relief washing over him. The city around him moved on as if nothing had happened, cars honking, people chatting, and the faint smell of food from a nearby corner cafe mixing with the air. For a moment he paused, taking in the normal rhythm of life, feeling the calm after the storm of tension that had followed him for the last blocks. He looked back briefly, almost instinctively. The gang was nowhere in sight. Their frustration and uncertainty had driven them to retreat, to reconsider what had just happened. The man didn't feel triumph in the sense of vengeance or satisfaction over someone else's failure. Instead, he felt a quiet acknowledgement of what he had achieved, control over a potentially dangerous situation without letting anger, fear, or ego dictate his actions. He continued walking, his pace steady, each step deliberate. Along the way, he noticed small details that he might have overlooked in the past. A flower shop opening its shutters, a group of elderly people greeting one another as they walked, and the gentle chatter of children playing in a nearby park. These simple moments reminded him of why he moved through the city with awareness. Life was full of ordinary things, and even in tense moments, there were always reminders of the everyday beauty that existed around him. By the time he reached the small courtyard outside his apartment building, he was fully aware that the encounter had left a mark on the street and the people who had witnessed it. Some pedestrians had stopped to whisper to one another about the calm, strong man who had walked through a gang without yielding an inch. Others had probably told friends and family later, recounting how he had maintained composure and awareness while others might have panicked. Even in the absence of recognition, the energy he had radiated had shifted the people around him, quietly teaching a lesson about strength and control. As he climbed the steps to his apartment, he reflected on the incident. He thought about how small actions, remaining calm, being aware of surroundings, and using intelligence over aggression, had turned the situation in his favor. He realized that many people often underestimated others, assuming that confidence or quietness equated to weakness. The gang had learned this the hard way, and though it wasn't his intention to humiliate them, the lesson was inevitable. Inside his apartment, he set down his briefcase and took a moment to breathe deeply. The tension from the street still lingered in his muscles, but it was slowly fading. He felt a sense of accomplishment that didn't rely on confrontation, but on measured awareness and patience. He had acted with purpose, protecting himself without escalating the danger unnecessarily. The man thought about the bystanders who had observed the encounter. He imagined some of them walking away with a new perspective, perhaps reflecting on how composure could change outcomes, or how fear and aggression weren't always the answers in tense situations. The subtle influence of calm confidence could ripple outward even when unnoticed. This thought gave him a quiet satisfaction. He went to the window and looked out at the city below. Life continued at its usual pace, indifferent to the events that had just unfolded. But the man knew that small changes had occurred. The gang members, frustrated and humbled, would likely reconsider their behavior in the future. They had seen firsthand that appearances could be deceiving, and that underestimating someone based on looks or demeanor could lead to unexpected outcomes. He thought about the lessons embedded in the day's events. Awareness, composure, and intelligence were more powerful than aggression and intimidation. Acting with patience and control allowed him to navigate a tense situation while maintaining dignity. He realized that these lessons were not just for moments of conflict, but for everyday life. They were principles that could guide interactions, decisions, and responses to challenges. After a few moments, he moved to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. He stood there for a while, letting the cool liquid refresh him, and allowed his mind to revisit the events without the rush of adrenaline. The details played out clearly. Each step, each subtle movement, each decision that prevented escalation. He appreciated the quiet mastery he had exercised, the way calm awareness had neutralized potential danger. The man sat at his small dining table, thinking about the gang one last time. They had acted from arrogance and aggression, expecting easy dominance. But he had shown them that strength wasn't about loudness, speed, or brute force. It was about patience, intelligence, and control over oneself. The gang would leave the encounter with a deeper understanding, whether they admitted it or not. They had underestimated someone who looked ordinary but carried extraordinary composure and awareness. He allowed himself a small smile, not from triumph, but from understanding. Life presented many unpredictable moments, and not all of them could be solved through confrontation. Yet, there was a quiet power in being prepared, in thinking clearly, and in navigating challenges with purpose. He felt grateful for the lessons life had already taught him, the ones that allowed him to move safely through danger, without being ruled by fear. As evening settled over the city, the lights of nearby apartments and street lamps flickered on. The man continued his reflection, realizing that the incident had reinforced a personal truth. Control over oneself often determined control over circumstances. By remaining calm, aware, and deliberate, he had maintained authority over a chaotic situation. He had faced unpredictability and walked through it without yielding to pressure, and that was a victory in itself. He glanced at his phone and noticed a few messages from friends and neighbors, casual notes and greetings. None referenced the incident, and that was fine. The man didn't need recognition or applause. His satisfaction came from the quiet knowledge that he had handled the situation with intelligence, awareness, and dignity. Later, as he prepared for the evening, he reflected on the idea that true strength often went unnoticed. Many people equated power with noise, aggression, or dominance, but he knew better. Strength was subtle. It was calmness in the face of chaos, patience in moments of pressure, and awareness when others acted impulsively. These qualities had allowed him to navigate the streets safely, to neutralize aggression without unnecessary conflict, and to leave the gang to reflect on their misjudgment. He thought about the young member of the gang, impulsive and reckless, who had repeatedly attempted to provoke him. The boy had acted out of frustration and inexperience. The man didn't feel anger or contempt. He felt a sense of understanding. People often acted without full awareness, and the consequences of their assumptions could be lessons they needed to learn. His composure had been the teacher in this scenario, showing that intelligence and patience outweighed brute force. The man leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. He thought about the city outside, the people walking, the cars moving, the lights flickering, and the sounds of life continuing uninterrupted. In the midst of this ordinary world, he had faced an extraordinary test. He had passed not through aggression, not through dominance, but through awareness, calmness, and strategy. He considered the subtle impact of the day's events. Even if no one else recognized it, even if no one spoke of it aloud, there was a ripple effect. The gang had been forced to reassess their assumptions. Bystanders had witnessed an example of quiet strength and intelligence. The man himself had reinforced his understanding that composure and awareness were not just defensive tools, but guiding principles for life. Dinner was simple that evening, a meal prepared with care, and as he ate, he reflected on the lessons of the encounter, He realized that life often presented unexpected challenges, moments where people's assumptions about others could lead to tension or conflict. Yet the way one navigated these moments could make all the difference. Calmness, intelligence, and awareness allowed for control without aggression, influence without force, and respect without dominance. After cleaning up, he settled into his chair by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the early night. The streets were quieter now, the energy of the afternoon replaced by a softer rhythm. He thought again of the gang, imagining them somewhere behind him, frustrated and humbled, perhaps questioning their assumptions and reconsidering their actions. He didn't gloat or take pleasure in their discomfort. He simply acknowledged the truth of the lesson they had learned. The man felt a deep sense of peace. The encounter had tested him, but it had also reaffirmed his approach to life. Awareness, calmness, patience, and intelligence were his allies, and they had carried him safely through a potentially dangerous situation. He realized that these qualities were not just practical, they were powerful, subtle forms of strength that many overlooked. As he prepared for bed, he thought one last time about the streets, the people, and the tension that had followed him that afternoon. The gang's laughter, their attempts at intimidation, and their frustration had all been part of a test. He had passed it by staying true to himself, by maintaining control over his reactions, and by using intelligence over aggression. The city outside was calm now, but the lesson remained vivid in his mind. Strength was not in noise or brute force, but in composure, awareness, and quiet confidence. He turned off the lights and lay down, feeling a sense of closure. The events of the day had passed, but the lessons would stay with him. Calmness, awareness, and intelligence had not only kept him safe, they had turned a dangerous moment into a demonstration of human resilience, strategy, and dignity. The gang, though frustrated and humbled, had been given a lesson they would not soon forget. The man drifted into sleep with a quiet smile, knowing that he had handled the day with skill, awareness, and composure. He had walked through tension and emerged unshaken, not through confrontation but through intelligence, patience, and control. In the end, the city continued its rhythm. The streets buzzed with life, and a subtle but powerful truth had been reaffirmed. Calm strength often spoke louder than aggression, and awareness often outmatched force.